Hey there! My name is Shoof, and you probably don't know who I am. But if you're watching this video, then I'm willing to bet you've had some rough dungeon experiences on your way through Final Fantasy XIV. Such as dealing with tanks who don't mitigate properly, or at all. Or DPS players that only hit one monster when 15 of them are beating up your tank. Or potentially healers that just heal, and then wait until there's something else to heal. We've all been there, and I know that dungeon content isn't something that's always very exciting to talk about, but with Endwalker closing in, and a whole bunch of new players joining the community, I thought I'd put together a little primer to hopefully make your trips through any and all dungeons, but especially endgame dungeons, a lot smoother. Dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV are typically built with a strict formula in mind. That formula being between 2 and 5 monster or trash packs, followed by a boss of some sort. And the media tour coverage we've seen for Endwalker so far has shown that dungeons seem to continue following this format. Because of this consistent dungeon formula, the player base has adapted a playstyle to clear these dungeons as efficiently as possible. When it comes to endgame roulettes and dungeon clearing, this playstyle can make every dungeon run smoother. The general strategy for doing these dungeons is that the tank will do what is referred to as a wall-to-wall pull. And that means that they're going to grab every monster until the dungeon stops them with some form of barrier that they cannot pass. Then the entire party, yes, even the healers, will proceed to blow the trash monsters up with heavy DPS and cooldown usage. This is due to the fact that trash monsters in Final Fantasy XIV don't usually have anything interesting they do outside of an AoE or two, so it's just faster to pull them all at once and then mow them down quickly. This leads me to what this primer is going to cover, and that is how to be an excellent teammate while doing dungeon content on any role. And this is obviously about higher level content, where everyone should have an idea of what their buttons do by now. So if you're a lower level player, or still learning the ropes, just keep this information in mind while you're leveling and do your best. We're going to cover all this by going role by role, starting with the tanks. As the tank of the group, your job is not only to set the pace of the dungeon, but to smooth out the incoming damage you receive from all sources with your defensive toolkit, all while contributing to DPS as much as possible. How best to achieve this is that once you've gathered all of the monsters for a section of the dungeon and you cannot go any further, make sure you place them all on top of any ranged or spellcaster monsters, as they will not run all the way to you. Once this is done, you'll start cycling through your cooldowns. And what I mean by cycling your cooldowns is to work through your cooldowns one at a time, starting with your big 30% cooldown, such as Sentinel, Nebula, Shadow Wall, or Vengeance. Alternatively, you can use your invulnerability cooldown at the start, but if you're not a paladin, this requires communication between you and your healer to be worthwhile. The reason you're using your big mitigation first is that you have the highest amount of monsters, and therefore the majority of the damage coming at you at the beginning of the pull. And also that these buttons have a longer cooldown when compared to everything else in your toolkit. So it is beneficial to put them on cooldown early so that they're available for the next big pull after the boss. Once this cooldown is about 3 or 2 seconds left on the buff timer, you bring in your next cooldown, Rampart, which all tanks share. This can be paired with other smaller cooldowns like Sheltron, Raw Intuition, Heart of Stone, and the Blackest Night for greater effect if there are still a lot of monsters alive. The reason tanks want to cycle through their cooldowns instead of just hitting everything you have right at the start of the pull is that yes, you will be nigh unkillable while you have all those cooldowns running, but it's only going to last you about 10 to 15 seconds, and once that's all over, you have nothing to fall back on if any of the monsters are still kicking. By cycling your cooldowns, you smooth out the damage over the course of the pull to make it easier for your healer to contribute to DPS. Now, if your party is firing on all cylinders at this point, the trash may already be dead. But if not, it's okay, just keep going, working through your cooldowns one at a time. You can also pair together Reprisal with Arm's Length. This is a wonderful combo for slowing down the auto attacks on trash monsters, while lowering their damage a little bit towards the end of a trash pack. Once all the trash is dead, proceed to the boss. Now, if the boss has any tank buster mechanics you need to worry about at all, just use what you have available. But remember, only one cooldown, paired with a smaller cooldown like Sheltron, Heart of Stone, the Blackest Night, Raw Intuition, and once the boss is dead, all of your cooldowns should be ready to go for the next section of the dungeon. Just a small side note here, this one goes out to the you pull it, you tank it mentality players that I see sometimes on social media. That mentality has gotta go. Listen, it happens. Sometimes a DPS gets ahead of you and may pull a monster, or a healer sprints before you do and they get there before you, but that's okay. You were going to grab them anyways. Just throw your tank stance on, throw a GCD at them, and they're going to be yours anyways. It's okay. No reason to get upset. You're going to pull them anyways. Now, for healers and DPS players, if you accidentally aggro something, here's a tip. Just run on top of the tank. They're AoEing anyways. They're going to grab them off of you, no problem. So don't panic. Don't run around like a headless chicken. Just run to your boys or girls in blue, and everything will be okay. Now, if you follow these tips in this video, then you will absolutely be a tank that players will enjoy having in their dungeon, and the commendations will rain from the heavens. Up next, we're going to talk about the DPS. As a DPS player in a dungeon, your main goal is to make sure that everything the tank pulls goes from full HP down to 0 HP as fast as you can, all while making sure to avoid any and all avoidable damage. Now, for DPSing in a dungeon, there's a pretty simple guideline that you should follow when deciding when to AoE and when to single target. And I know there are differences between certain jobs as to when that is, but we'll be here all day if I try to cover every single job in one video. We're just trying to make the dungeon a smooth experience for everybody involved. So the basic strategy is that if you're engaging with 3 or more monsters, use your AoE, and on 2 or less, just focus on the one with lower HP with single target. The other big thing, aside from when to use your AoE, is when to use your damage cooldowns. And the answer to that is that you'll want to use them during the first big pull once the tank has got all the monsters together and stopped running. Then, you'll just want to use them on cooldown until the dungeon is over. This will ensure that the first big pull dies very quickly, saving your tank from using extra cooldowns and making the healer heal less. This has the bonus of putting your damage buttons on cooldown sooner, so that you get more uses out of them during the dungeon than if you were to save them for each boss. One final thing here in regards to DPS, and that has to do with limit break. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Yeah, we just had the melee limit break the boss at the end of the dungeon. Well, not always the case. If you have a caster or a ranged physical in your group, their limit break is actually really amazing to use on trash and will save you more time in a dungeon than waiting for the melee to use it on the very last 2% of the final boss's HP bar. Now, if you follow these tips, you will shine in dungeons as an example for your fellow DPS players to follow, and you may even steal a commendation or two away from the tanks and healers in the process. Now, last, but most definitely not least, the healers. I saved the healers for last intentionally because talking about healers in dungeon content, or any content for that matter, is kind of a sticky subject. Because as soon as the healers should do damage conversation starts, the you don't pay my sub or don't tell me how to play comments start bubbling up. But the fact of the matter is that healer damage absolutely matters, and that dungeon content rarely calls for a healer to only heal and nothing else. That is unless your tank is woefully undergeared or underperforming. And you're right, upset commenter, I don't pay your sub, and I know that I can't tell you how to play your character, but we are all in this together, and it's everyone's job to do their best to ensure that the dungeon is a nice experience for everyone involved. And don't forget, we all have the same goal, and that is to get to the end of the dungeon and lose the roll on the minion. So we should all respect each other's time and put our best effort in. Now, as for healing in dungeon content, when you zone in and after everyone says their hellos, you're probably going to see the tank toss on tank stance and sprint away from you. That's great. You've got a gamer tank on your hands. So you'll want to toss a pre-shield like Adloquium, Divine Benison, or something along those lines onto your tank while they're getting everything rounded up. This will smooth out any auto attacks they take in the process, all while trying not to get threat yourself. But if you do end up with a monster or two, just remember to stand on top of your tank and they will passively take them off of you with their AoE. Once the tank has everything settled in one spot and starts running their cooldowns, you can set down your Earthly Star, Sacred Soil, or Asylum down right on top of your tank. Then all you have to do is keep an eye on their HP and start blowing up the trash with your AoE and tossing any instant off-global cooldowns like Essential Dignity, Petra, Benediction, Excog, etc. Remember that the faster all this trash dies, the less damage your tank is going to be taking. Thus, the less healing you have to do. For the boss encounters, they're usually pretty tame with the outgoing damage, but just make sure everyone has enough HP to live through any type of group-wide or tank buster damage, all while tossing your DPS GCDs at the boss when it is okay to do so. A well-played healer is a tremendous asset to any dungeon group, and healers in some cases can contribute more damage than tanks when played very well. So do your best to do some damage while tossing things at your tank to keep them afloat. Remember, the only HP that really matters is the last one. As a healer though, you do have a greater responsibility than the rest of the group when it comes to content like this, and it may be intimidating to try and DPS while all those monsters are hitting your tank. But don't let that shy you away from trying to work in some DPS while you're healing. I know you can do it. Now, all of this is based on the assumption that your tank and DPS players are also doing their jobs appropriately. Healing in any content isn't usually as straightforward as when playing a tank or a DPS. You may have to change up your strategy if pulls are taking a little longer due to low DPS or if your tank isn't mitigating properly. But that is just you healing, friend. You got this. I'd like to wrap this video up by saying that this is all coming from over 8 years of doing dungeon content in Final Fantasy XIV. And I know that I may not change every 0 DPS healer or no cooldown tank's mind with this video, and that's okay. The goal here is to help ARM players who may not know these things, or those of you looking to excel with the knowledge to do so. At the end of the day, you can engage with this game however you choose. But if you try even just a little bit of what I've covered here, then I guarantee you that your dungeon runs will improve. I'd like to thank you all for watching the video, and I hope to see you all in Endwalker. Take care.